What's up, folks? MC in the house. So why are individuals, neighbors, family, friends, co-workers, etc., why is there still such a division in people's ability to connect over issues like the vaccination, the masking, the social distancing, etc.? I think it's important to know that there are probably two reasons why people are continuing to sort of wedge a gap between individuals' ability to connect, why they're maintaining this division. And the two reasons are either an inability to process information or a commitment to validating one's identity. Let's deal with each one individually. So the first one, an inability to process information. There is a position that was had early on in this fiasco that was very much centered around the initial numbers that we were getting out of China. And it was almost like a game of telephone, depending on who you were listening to, at what time of the day, at what level of frequency. You heard things from, this has a 15% mortality rate to 5%, which would still be, astronomical, and everything in between that you could imagine. And one of the things that I saw early on was, as the information began to continue to come in, and more people started getting their hands on the information, being able to deep dive on it themselves from a variety of different perspectives and levels of expertise, different schools of training, I started to see a bigger picture develop. Well, a bigger picture was developing, and I noticed it, as did a significant number of people as well. And with this new information came new positions, came new developments, came new relationships with what it is we were supposed to do, what we were accountable for, what we could possibly be intimidated by, if you're into that sort of thing, or what is it that you as an individual could see yourself sort of subjecting yourself to if you didn't abide by whatever regulations and restrictions were out there. With the consistent release of information, another thing that we saw was projections turn into observations. The things that people, given the information that was available, projected as a possible outcome or a possible trajectory of where things were going to lead, we stopped needing to rely on projections as much, because the information started being there. There is a point in the development of this where it was considered to be, a novel coronavirus, and whereas the novelty of it, did have a little bit of a consequence that separated it from the coronaviruses that we were already exposed to, the ones that were already endemic. Whereas it did have that extra sort of, consequence, there was an argument that eventually it would fall into yet another, just coronavirus that we had to contend with. Along with that came the observation of its seasonality. And I can go down the list. I will say one of the issues that happened, though, or one of the issues that arose that led to that initial cause of division that's still being maintained these days, is people's inability to process that information. So you had individuals who were getting new information, but were either so scared that they couldn't wrap their head around a different relationship with the situation than what was initially installed by media, etc. But you also had people that they didn't understand. They didn't understand the math. They didn't understand these people were asked to do math sometimes for the first time in their lives. I doubt the first time, first time as an adult maybe. But also there were people who had to brush up on what this meant, and distribution curves and all of the math involved. I made some videos early on trying to sort of simplify the perspective that people should have in terms of just the magnitude of this. But the greater point being, some people just weren't tracking that. And I will say, hey, I can't fault somebody for not having the ability to understand something at a level that has them, evolve their relationship with it. Like, it is what you make of it, But the second group, the second reason why people have created and are now continuing to maintain this divide, and again, this could be neighbors, family members, co-workers, everybody in between, is the need that they have to validate their identities. Now, what do I mean by that? I'll give you an example. Recently, my mother was hospitalized for 5 days because of COVID complications. She's since out and she's fine. Thank you for asking. But she was not vaccinated. And a good friend of hers, a woman who I have a tremendous amount of respect for, and is a very, very long time friend of my mother's, who's in the healthcare industry, when asked, when I updated her on my mother having to be admitted to go on some oxygen, she, said, well, wasn't she vaccinated? To which I replied, no. And her reply to my reply was, somewhat, disturbing, but indicative of a lot of the mindsets of people around. She said, but why wouldn't your mother get vaccinated? She's not one of those Trump nuts. And, it's, and again, I'm somebody who promotes and advocates for, building your relationship with yourself to the point where you aren't, triggered or activated by the deficiencies of other people and, where they are in their journey. But it sort of made me pause for a second, and I thought to myself, this lady is who I love, who I have a tremendous amount of respect for, very, very, close friend of my family. She reduced the existence or the compliance of vaccinations on political lines. And isn't Trump the one that fast-tracked the vaccine? Like, isn't Trump, the guy who was saying to take a vaccine? Wasn't that a thing? Did we forget that at some point? But the fact that my mother wasn't vaccinated aside, she had a relationship with the politicization of what the vaccine is now become in the national, if not global, conversation. And she was not willing to negotiate any sort of, offset or deviation from that position. If you are somebody who does not want to take the vaccination, and you needn't be someone who doesn't believe in its efficacy, none of that needs to be tethered onto it, anchored onto it. But if you're somebody who just does not want to take the vaccine, it is very commonplace for people now to somehow label you as some right-wing nut or some Trump nut or something to that effect, when you could have absolute, logical, rational, science-based reasons for not wanting to take the vaccination. At a minimum, these could be more philosophical, even ethical, but, just science alone, that's a superhero of so many people that are of that mindset. Yet it seems like, their relationship with science is at times more compartmentalized than others. So you have these people who are looking to say, in so many words, if I concede that your position is either valid or your right to have your position is valid, somehow that undermines my ability to be me. And it is such a low form of existence. It's such a low form of loyalty to alliance, because it is based on a almost a level of tyranny. And let me connect those dots. If in order for you to be you, you require me to be something, That is the DNA of a tyrant. In order for the tyrant to be true to themselves, they require, demand the compliance of other people to whatever rituals or identity they prescribe to them. I heard recently of some people in the family, my family, who are not talking to their children because their children are not supportive of taking the vaccine. And I would say with good reason, with rational reasons, with no conspiracy-based reasons. The children are healthy. The children understand that this is not getting sick. If you were to get this in January, February 2020, it's different from getting it right now in 2021, the end of 2021. The therapeutics that have been developed and have been shown to be successful, meaning the ways that we treat it once it's here, these things are valid. My mother wasn't vaccinated. My mother did have a dose of an infusion of monoclonal antibodies when she was in the hospital. She was on oxygen. She was on a corticosteroid. The name of it escapes me at the moment. And she was also on remdesivir. And she was there, and her oxygen was low, which is the reason for her, going in the first place. She's been out of the hospital since this past weekend, and she's, convalescing. Don't get to say that enough in life. Convalescing at my house. The doctor said she would be on oxygen from 1 to 2 weeks, and she's just about off of it already. In the 2-3 days she's been at my house. There is something to be said for my mother, who's 69, not in peak physical condition, certainly not where she was a few years ago, has been making steady progress, could stand to make a lot more, and believe me, she's heard it, and she's committed to do so. There is a logical position of, I am going to work on my immunities, I'm going to work on becoming healthy, I'm going to work on increasing my physical condition, and I'm going to trust the efficacy of the therapeutics that are available. Again, there are people who, for a very, very long time, did not take the flu vaccine every year. And, I heard some people say that, this is an improper or a fallacious, analogy to compare, flu to COVID. And it's an absolute, almost perfect analogy to compare the two. Okay? It was a virus that was seasonal, that tended to prey on its targets when their immune systems were compromised, which tended to be, at the times of year where, a bunch of different variables were in place. And there was a vaccine, and there is a vaccine, and some people never took it. It was commonly accepted and known in that application that, there was a different strain every year. And, taking last year's flu vaccine did nothing for you this year. And I don't understand why people would somehow reject the logic of that being the same case with the vaccine that is available now. There's also an argument for, what the natural immunities are. And I went down just, to put it out there. My mother had gotten COVID while in Florida, and I drove down and drove her back in the car. She was in the car with me, and she was, sick the whole time. She was coughing the whole time, and we were in a car, and it's Florida, and we had the AC on, and I don't care what anybody says. There's a good chance that I had COVID a month ago. Everybody in my house had it. The reason we know that is because my wife had lost her sense of smell upon being sick for a few days. My kids had, a little bit of sickness less than 24 hours. I had a cold for 2 days, which was mostly sneezing and congestion in the nasal cavities. But aside from that, I felt, pretty tip-top. And I went and picked up my mother. She needed to have some mental space, some energy, brought into familiar environments, and she couldn't get on a plane in her condition. So I drove down and I got her. I didn't contract any consequences or symptoms after that 20-something hour trip. She's now, in my home with my whole family. The doctors are telling her, as we would expect, oh, you have to have a mask on in your car with your son when you're driving. Make sure that you're convalescing away from the children and away from your son and his wife, and it's dare I say complete bullshit. There is a level of preparation that escalates to the point of becoming dysfunctional. Preparation, once it loses function, becomes paranoia. And I cannot think of a more appropriate label for what we see people practicing these days when it comes to this. It is absolute paranoia. And the people who cannot understand the science of this or want to reject the logic because somehow they have become such small individuals that they would reject family before they questioned the validity of their own identity. I can't think of anything more pathetic. These family members of mine who are basically isolated from their children, their grown children. It is, I cannot think of a word more accurate than pathetic. I think it's probably expected and certainly understood in my family. Like, listen, I love everybody in my family. I will help anybody in my family. I will give anybody in my family anything that they need to help them. But when I see people displaying disloyalty to other family members just so they cannot question the validity of who they are and defend their own, identities, it's something that I take issue with. And I'm not somebody that, the ambiguity of this video notwithstanding for the purposes of sharing it with the general public, but I'm somebody who doesn't really handle things indirectly. Now, what's the value of this to you, the listener of this video? If you have disconnected yourself from your family over disagreements on the relationship with this fiasco, you need to sit down and actually contemplate what family means to you in the first place. Why is it that you think that it is okay to ostracize your family members when not only, we don't even have to get into the actual data being available to suggest and indicate the absolute ridiculousness of this, but there is actually a precedent that you can compare yourself to in people and families and people who don't agree with you, who are living their lives, whose families are connected. The first thing I told my mother when I picked her up, get that fucking mask off of your face. We don't do that. She's staying in my house with my 4 young children, with my wife and I. Like, I don't have one issue with that. She was concerned about it because she's, my mother, she's their grandmother, so it's expected. And I told her, I said, listen, we all were sick a month ago. I'm not worried about this. I'm not running from this. I'm not going to leave my mother alone and isolated because of some paranoia that I'm selling as being responsible or prepared. Pathetic. Absolutely pathetic. So if you're somebody out there who has family members that are acting like this, I'm not going to tell you to cut them off. I'm not going to tell you to tell them to go fuck themselves. What you should do is you should remind them that you love them. Remind them that you accept them any way they are. Remind them that your door is always open. But also let them know that where they are in this relationship is completely on them. They're going to be the ones who initiated it. They're going to be the ones that maintain it. And ultimately, they're going to be the ones to end it so that you can become family members, functional family members again. I appreciate you guys. Talk to you soon.